Hey, we're live.
Hey, look at that.
Hey.
Hey, whoa.
How's it going?
I'm pretty good. How are you doing?
Good. Good.
Good.
Ready to end the
Good.
week, and
Yep.
I'm gonna have to run out and do things
Yeah.
tonight.
As you do. I have some like sort of quasi small errands to do as well.
I'm also gonna catch the second episode of Mandalorian season 3 tonight.
See, you said season what?
Season 3, I believe. Yeah, season 3.
Yeah, yeah. Have you
Yeah.
been watching that? Are you caught up on it right now?
There's only one episode out. Well, no, there's two
Oh,
episodes out. The last episode was released on Wednesday. So
yep.
if anybody's following the Mandalorian, you'd have two episodes to catch up on now.
Good show.
We'll see. The first one was weird.
Oh, okay
Basically,
then.
because did you watch Book of Boba Fett?
I did not. I have not seen that.
Book of Boba Fett has in the middle of it like an intermission where they're like, "Hey, we're gonna watch 3 episodes of Mandalorian season 3,"
Yeah.
and it sets up a bunch of things that are probably important to know for season 2 or for season 3. So the first episode of season 3 was like, "Hey, in case you didn't watch this, here's what happened." They do it narratively, so it's not like them like catching you up. Here's what happened. They just have Mando repeat some things he did to reestablish the fact that he did these things in 3 episodes of Book of Boba Fett. So it was
Oh,
kind of like a pretty poor beginning to the series, the third season.
in case you missed it, in case you missed my adventures in the Book of Boba Fett.
Yeah, they're like nothing exciting. He fights some pirates, which maybe are a long term theme for this season. But either way, and
Yeah.
he ends up talking to more Mandalorians. So
Oh, like folks from Mandalore.
yeah, well, it's stuff that was already established in the past seasons, where there's
Yeah.
more than one sect of Mandalorian, and some are more religious or like uh, uh, more of a more zealots about the Mandalorian code, and others
Ye-
are
Yeah.
not. So
Yeah.
I think they're gonna explore that a bit more. Either way, episode two's out, so I'm gonna
Sweet.
watch that. All
Sweet.
right. Well, for those of you joining us, which no one has yet, uh, yeah.
We're
Uh,
just catching up.
Yep, we're just catching up. If you're new to this program, this is Sonic Boom Live. Eric and I are from the video game industry, and
Yep.
we decided instead of like people just talking about rumors and latest game news and like I don't know, the rumor mill, I guess, we were going to take a more serious approach to game industry news and look at articles and the goings on in the industry that are much more impactful to the industry at large.
Yep.
Um, so, for instance, we've been talking an awful lot about the Activision Microsoft acquisition, which will have a pretty strong impact on the industry if and when it does happen. So we've been
Hmm.
following that, reporting on that. We will report on it today, but we also talk about things that may have a bigger impact. But speaking of rumors, we are going to talk about one today.
Yeah.
Um,
But we're not going to speculate. That's the idea is to say, let's take a look at this through a business lens and evaluate
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
Marginal speculations in the sense that like we don't actually have any inside knowledge on anything that
Right.
happens at Nintendo, but we can look at the facts of what's going on, and we can kind of go over the rumors that have been sprouting up and be like, hey, here's what's probably true. This is what's more or less than expected, and what you can likely expect in the next year from Nintendo, I guess.
Yeah.
Um,
Here are reasons that they
yeah,
may be true.
and that's going to
Yeah.
be I think it's going to be our biggest discussion point. What are the other two topics we're going to be covering today, Eric?
We are going to be talking more about the Microsoft's acquisition of ABK, Activision Blizzard King. That's one company shortened usually to Activision or ABK.
Yeah.
There's some updates there. And finally, we're going to talk a little bit about the Microsoft's sort of ongoing difficulties with Starfield.
Yeah.
And they're and more broadly, their difficulties with shipping first-party titles.
Yeah. And it's probably not much speculation here. It's just a matter of like, what does this mean for Microsoft and how it's impacted their kind of performance over this first 3 years of this new console generation. What it might mean for them in the future. We can talk a bit about that. So, if you are joining us and you like our content, please like and subscribe. It will help us understand what people actually care about, because we've been streaming games as well to see if people kind of prefer us doing that and discussing it. It's just really hard to discuss a game when in the middle of playing it, especially a game like Hi-Fi Rush, which we've been covering.
Where you have to...
Yeah. As a player, it's super difficult to talk about something while you're also trying to time the rhythm and perform game actions and discuss things in a coherent way.
Yeah,
way more difficult than Xbox.
One of the things that we've talked about on that, and I've been watching Justin play on the stream, but I've also played the game separately. And one of the things that we mentioned about the game is that it's a lot if you're trying to play well, as the game rewards you and incentivizes you to do, which means you play rhythmically, and to do that is cognitively quite a bit to deal with all at once.
Yeah, especially for my old man brain. So
yep.
Even though like I grew up playing like things like Guitar Hero, it's difficult. Anyways, let's get into the first topic, and this is addressing the Switch 2 rumors again. Which, to be clear, we've done this before, but we like the rumors keep popping up, and I think originally we had covered this pretty extensively when the Switch 2. Well, not Switch 2, Switch Pro rumors were swirling about in 2021. So we talked about it and what the likely situation was. We're going to go back over that, but there's been new rumors, and we kind of want to like just put a nail in this and be like, I think we're at the home stretch for some sort of new Nintendo announcement, but this may be the last one until Nintendo actually talks about something in the near future. But let's recap stuff. Eric, do you want to tackle recapping this right now? Or do you want me to?
Why don't you do it? Because I may get tangled up in commentary while also trying to recap.
All right, fair enough. This is we're covering this again because there's been about a year of no real Switch rumors. We had kind of like this nice lull from 2021 to today, but that changed when.
There's the one situation where the Switch OLED,
which was 2021, that was announced in 2021.
I thought it was 2022.
It was released in October 2021.
No kidding! Wow, my time.
Exactly. It's like COVID time messes things up. It was like, it was released. It wasn't released last year.
Oh no, it was Nintendo Switch. Wait, no.
I thought I looked this up, and I was almost certain that I had 2021 was when they.
No, you're right. The Google's initial response was for like a new Pokemon themed version, which came out of that model. That
I
came
didn't realize
out.
They're doing theme models of those. I knew they're still doing like theme models of the base or like the core version, but I didn't.
Apparently, it was like something that was done with the Pokemon Scarlet and I don't remember the other one. Violet, yeah. Those two games.
Which actually is a good segue, because the reason why we're covering this again is because a rumor was going around 4chan of all places, because some anonymous poster had listed a bunch of information about what to expect from Pokemon, like what was getting patched in Pokemon Violet, and one of the things that were mentioned was this next or other Nintendo system. What add credence to it was a lot of the things that were suggested would be getting patched turned out to be true, but obviously Nintendo's not being like, there's definitely another console that we're not ready to talk about yet. So people start speculating, hey, this guy's a real person and may actually have some sort of insider knowledge at HAL. I think it's HAL that was developing Pokemon Violet. Or not Pokemon Company, sorry, not HAL. That's HAL's Kirby. Anyways, but instead of like weighing in on the rumor, which I don't really want to do, because there's no way of validating anything that this person's saying. Like, it could be absolutely correct,
Yeah.
because the timelines that they give make sense, but it doesn't matter, right? Like it's not like the person is coming out and being like, yeah, I'm definitely from the Pokemon company and here's proof. The proof that they have is just putting something on 4chan, which is like I don't know, the place where you wouldn't do that if you
Right.
want to
Yeah.
have some sort of legitimacy.
Yeah.
So anyways, let's trace back what has happened. Spring 2021, there were a bunch of rumors going on about a Switch Pro model. Originally, the concept or thoughts around this was Nintendo would do some sort of mid-gen refresh. They would have 4K capability, and the Pro model would have an OLED screen. The rumors were mostly coming from some sources, like trusted sources, like what's it called? I'm blanking on it. It's the industrial report for the game industry, and their reporter includes like Michael Pachter and one other person who tends to like give credence to some rumors by industry knowledge.
Is it the industry knowledge or the analysis done of like parts distributors or parts
Well, I
suppliers?
think it's because they were looking at parts distributor information and going, hey, yeah, this is probably partially true.
They see a big buy of some component and they're like,
Yeah,
ah,
and this is what
yeah,
was going on, right? You can trace things back to Nintendo based on procurement,
yeah,
and chip manufacturing and all these things that go into a Nintendo product. And people were beginning to see purchases being made. One of which was the OLED procurement, I think from Samsung, or yeah, I think it was Samsung. They were getting it from, or it might
uh,
have been
yeah.
Panasonic.
Well, OLED isn't. I think Samsung doesn't touch OLEDs. It
Oh, that's
must have
right. Yeah,
been
yeah. It was then it would have been Panasonic
LG.
OLED or LG. Excuse me.
Yeah, yeah,
Oh, switching up the manufacturers. Yeah, LG.
yeah.
So there's a big amount of procurement there and small size OLEDs, which they're like, hey, that points to a new, some sort of new Nintendo model that would be using an OLED. People jumped on it and been like, this has to be a 4K model. And at the same time, NVIDIA has always been like one of the biggest leakers, being like, yeah, we're working on something for a next Nintendo console. This is part of their financial reports. They have a hard time not saying it because a lot of this has to go into their financial reporting as to why they're going to be making more
Yeah.
profit this year over the next year. So there was talk about a next gen Tegra chip, or some sort of variant thereof. All this led to speculation that like, hey, Nintendo's definitely working on a next gen Switch of some sort. Yeah, like I said, the going thought was a 4K model, but in June 2021, Nintendo, which officially was like, "Hey, we have an OLED model. It's a normal Switch. It's running on the 16 nanometer Tegra chip, but it's the 16 nanometer Tegra chip was, I think, replaced in all models sometime like 2 or 3 years ago.
I actually don't know if the base model did get the upgrade. I think it came out with the Switch Lite.
Yeah, right. It was the lower,
Yeah.
smaller nanometer, more power efficient, so like the light. But I don't see why they wouldn't have put it in the
Unified
new.
it on the one. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's probable that they did that if once they work through the already created models at that point. There's no reason to. I mean, I guess capacity throughput, supply capacity.
yeah,
If you can develop on two separate fabs at the same time, you can
yeah.
double
So
your
they have to
output or
redesign the
whatever.
board slightly, and then they'd be able
Yeah,
to put
yeah.
it across all. But either way, they announced the OLED model. It was released in October 2021, and then all the sort of rumors kind of got squashed there because everybody's idea of some sort of 4K model kind of died right there. But I think we can talk about like what actually happened. I think there was a conflation between actual procurement for some sort of next gen prototype that Nintendo was working on and OLED models, which had industry insiders and people who do analysis for the game industry were like, oh yeah, there's definitely a new Nintendo model, and then none of it came true. And now we're sitting at this year gulf where people kind of expected a new Nintendo model to be, and there still isn't one yet. Nor has
Yeah,
there been any announcement.
let's quickly point out that the 2021 date would have been a little bit weird because it it was 4 years after Nintendo launched
Right.
the
Which is
Switch,
why I think
which
more people were leaning at like some sort of next gen refresh.
yeah, or an upgrade, like a mid grade thing, like a Switch Pro,
Yep.
or a like equivalent of the PlayStation 4 Pro or the Xbox One X
Right.
that Microsoft and Sony did after 4 years of their 3, 4, 5 years of their hardware gen. And in this case, that sort of would have made sense. They did have it, like, it got an upgraded screen, so there's that. It
Yep.
got a brighter, more vibrant screen with better blacks. Sweet.
Yep.
But Nintendo, there are other reasons that we'll get to where we suspect that something else was happening at Nintendo.
Yeah.
But generally they're more on the 5 or 6 year cycle.
Refresh cycle, yeah.
With the Wii U being their shortest generation, and that being just under 5 years.
And I think their longest, not including handhelds, because I don't actually know how long it's gone between
That's
handhelds.
Yeah.
But at least with the main consoles, their main consoles haven't gone more than 6 years, not including the Nintendo.
The Famicom and the original NES.
Which had, I mean, for Sega Genesis as well, had very long console generation before they were replaced.
You mean the Master System or
Genesis Master System, which were kind of the same thing?
No, they were different consoles.
But I don't think I think the Genesis had like 8 or 9 years on it before it was replaced with the Saturn.
Saturn?
Yeah.
It might have. Didn't the Saturn come out before the PlayStation 1?
Within this, I think it was within the same year or within a year
thereabouts.
From each other.
Yeah. So I guess I'd have to look at it to see how long.
Yeah, I'd have to look at it too, but I think
like
the Genesis came out like 96 and was replaced in like.
Oh, it would have been before that. It would have been early 90s.
Yeah, because I was in elementary school.
We were you and I were in elementary school when those came out.
Matt, I won't say his last name, had one, and I was over at his house. I'm like, I want to play Sonic.
Yeah, so good.
I was pretty jazzed by that. Anyways,
yeah.
What I will say, based on your comment, 4 years is not too early, though, for them to be doing prototyping and to be manufacturing for internal development and or trusted third-party development that would be getting some sort of prototype unit for them to start development on.
Yeah.
So,
Nintendo does also, at least my understanding, is that historically they also will incubate their new consoles for quite a while. So they have long prototyping phases.
Yeah. But not, like if something came up in stuff that where there's procurement, like obvious procurement of materials that would seem some sort of larger ramp up, it would have been for some sort of further than prototype that they would be looking at doing some sort of dev kit for internal or trusted third party developers.
Yeah.
Which also lined up with rumors with people saying, like some developers saying, hey, we're playing with new Nintendo hardware. And like, again, not sure if it's true. I don't have any hands-on with any supposed new Nintendo hardware. I'm just saying that the 4-year timeline of them procuring for some sort of ramp up where people would have prototype hardware is not weird. That's well within what you'd expect for that. Like, PlayStation has prototype development kits 2 years before launch as well.
Yeah. What are you done with the wrap up, or should
no? There's a little bit more to go.
Okay.
So OLED model gets launched. There's a couple things worth pointing out, which is Nintendo has also, and Nvidia has also outright said, here's a Tegra variant that we're working on. It even has a name. At least for Nvidia. For Nintendo, they also have internal names for their hardware. We don't know what those are. But yeah, so this 4chan, so that helps lead credence that like there is something and a new Nintendo system that is in development somewhere and it has some unknown release date. But there's enough evidence to point out there is something else coming. It's just we don't know when.
Yeah, I mean, there's also a fair statement that could be made where it's just you can assume that Nintendo is working on something.
Yeah,
like
I mean, right? It's
all of the any console manufacturer that's actively supporting stuff and seems to have plans that extend beyond the current generation. If they've not come out and stated we're out of the industry after this, like this is not a market we want to compete in, they're probably working on something.
Yeah,
So,
and you can also say the same thing with like PlayStation. Like PlayStation's working on
oh yeah,
the PlayStation 6. Like
oh, get it guaranteed.
internal development is already working on this problem and working out what their next set of products are going to be.
Yeah, it might be
Um,
ideation level because it's possibly still too early, but they're going to be working, like keeping an eye on, and talking with chip manufacturers and whatnot to see like, okay, what's on your roadmap? What are the features you're looking for? Can we talk about that? Because we have certain requirements that we're looking for, trends in the industry we want to follow and support going forward, that kind of thing.
right. And stuff that addresses like shortcomings in like this console
Right.
generation. Like this console generation, hey, like there is not a good way of handling AI upscaling, which would be a way to
Yeah.
make hardware more efficient than just brute forcing
Straight
it. So
pure,
like working
yeah.
with AMD and the likes to
And
figure out what their next SoC is going to look like, 3-4 years from now when they start kind of nailing everything down.
yeah, the other thing you can probably say is that, like, yes, these consoles, the current generation, at least Sony, Microsoft, do support hardware ray tracing, but it's
Yeah,
still
that's another one.
relatively limited. So probably that's going to expand in the next, whatever the next hardware cycle is, if there is one. Like, it
Yeah.
could be that both of them decide, you know what, like now's the time, and they go to a full subscription service.
Right.
Certainly, Microsoft could do that. Just like what they ship you is a
Microsoft
tiny
already
box,
which I
right?
think is kind of obvious in all their positioning.
Yeah.
Yeah. So to get onto like the rumor thing that kicked all this off again was that, like I said, there was a 4chan post. The person claimed they were from the Pokemon company. They claimed the graphic patch was going to be arriving in 2024, spring 2024 for Pokemon Violet, and that would have some sort of graphic patch that would allow it to run on a different spec of hardware. This is what has kind of this was part of the speculation that, hey, they're talking about a brand new Nintendo system that we don't know about yet, and supposedly there is a serial number that you can punch in to figure out what the set of model hardware is going to be used, and set of model hardware that that is unlisted. Like it's a serial number that does not correspond with available hardware today. And then from there, it kind of spiraled out, and Nintendo did what Nintendo does, and they start, DMCA taking down people's videos who claim that they have some sort of insider Switch knowledge or Nintendo knowledge, because Nintendo's notoriously very aggressive in taking down things they don't like, even if there's not. It's kind of like the FBI, or like not the FBI, but like the like CIA and the U.S. military, when they're like, there's a strange object in the sky and we shot it down, we're not telling anybody, and we're not going to deny that it's not alien. It's like, it wasn't alien, but like, we're not going to deny that it wasn't. You're like, okay, well, that's not helping anybody now, is it? And it's the sort of thing with Nintendo. Like, they may have a very good reason to be pulling down this information, but one way or another, the actions don't help control the rumors that are spiraling currently that there's, a Switch 2, Nintendo Next Gen, whatever you want to call it, thing. So what is actually going on here, and what do we want to talk about in terms of what is the likely truth around what's going on with Nintendo?
Yeah, I'm right now, I'm looking into this. You said March 20, or not March, like spring 2024 for the Pokemon like patch. Was that spring 2024 or 2023?
The suggestion was spring 2024 was when a graphic patch would be released for Pokemon Violet that would allow it to run on a different hardware spec.
Right. Okay. Cool. So, yeah, like, I don't know. I'm just struggling. Can you restate the question? I want to make sure I answered this.
Yeah. Well, what's actually going on with Nintendo? Like, what is the likely truth in what Nintendo's doing? We kind of touched on this in that Nintendo's certainly developing some new piece of hardware.
Right.
It was well within their the current time frame.
Yep.
Of when they would be prototyping and or beginning to do production runs to test manufacturing of a brand new console. We also discussed briefly that, hey, like 6 years is what Nintendo usually dwells on with their console like generations.
Lifetimes. Yeah.
So we're coming up to this next spring.
Yep.
when 6 years from when they released the first Switch.
Well, it'll be 7. We just the Switch was 20.
Oh,
We
yeah.
just hit the 6th anniversary.
Yeah, so we're actually a little bit long in the tooth for Nintendo, not including NES. So yeah, what's actually going on with Nintendo? What might be the truth that's laying in all this?
Yeah, I suspect, like you and I have talked about this online, or offline, but I suspect that Nintendo probably would have already announced a successor console if it hadn't been for two things. Sort of, if you take a step back, one thing, but and that is the pandemic. The pandemic threw a huge wrench in everybody's plans, and in Nintendo's case, this was a big fat golden wrench.
Yeah.
What I mean by that is when everyone went into lockdown, the Switch started flying off of shelves because it hit a really sweet spot for families experiencing lockdown, particularly adults with kids. Suddenly, adults with kids had to continue to work remotely, but also somehow entertain their children. And Switch was an excellent sort of kid-focused or more kid-focused. There's a lot more content available for that targets kids on that platform than the other platforms. So it was excellent for that. Cheaper than the other consoles available at the time. We're at the same price. And it could be portable. So you could have the kid go play in their room if it was too loud on a big TV or too close to where you had to set up shop to be remote on a meeting. There's a whole bunch of reasons for that. Additionally, they launched what is the name of that game?
Animal Crossing.
That's it. Thank you. Animal Crossing: New Horizons, where adults without kids, largely, at least in my experience, my personal friend group, would buy this game and sort of live in a happy little world doing little day-to-day things that did not involve COVID. And it exploded beyond any version of Animal Crossing to date.
Yeah.
That game sold bananas and definitely pushed more sales of the Switch. That game came out, by the way, in fall of 2020.
Yeah.
So right at the heart of COVID. So Nintendo, the sales of the Switch were so high that they sold out and then had trouble keeping up with demand because of the chip shortage. And that chip shortage is also caused by the pandemic. This is reason number 2, pandemic-related reasons, was going to delay anything that they were going to do. If their existing console and technology is selling gangbusters, better than it ever had before, they have zero incentive to try to replace it. It would be a monumental business error to attempt to do that. So now they're like reevaluating their plans and looking at it and saying, well, thank goodness that we can rely on this really old, easier, cheaper to produce hardware for the time being, because all of the components are really difficult and expensive to come by right now. Not that they're difficult to fabricate. It's just that all of the what is it called? The chain of supply chain. There we go. The supply chain going all the way up was sort of backed up, and there was an increased demand for components, usually the smaller components, not like big chips. But then to meet up with demand, you had the existing fabrication plants being overwhelmed. People, on top of lockdowns, reducing the amount of time that they could be open and how they can be staffed and all that other stuff. So they had all of these different pieces sort of working together to disincentivize Nintendo from working to produce what could have been a 2023 launch or possibly even late 2022 launch for a new console. Fast forward to today, and at some point they said, well, we can unify our lines for a Switch Lite and our Switch and get the Switch OLED, give people a nicer screen, sort of give it a little bit of a refresh that makes it feel more modern, and get a little more life out of it, and with some basic improvements, and keep people happy and keep sales going.
Yeah. It's also not strange for Nintendo to also have like their like professional version of their handheld consoles to release the same year or within the same time frame of them releasing a brand new console, which they've typically done.
Yeah,
like
they do that with
Game Boy Micro came out, which was like the advanced, that shrunk down version of the advance after the DS had already been announced,
right?
Or released for that matter.
And then they had the I think it was like the
DSi.
DS. Yeah, DSi came out, and very shortly after was the 3DS.
Yep.
And then there was the 3DS. After that there was the 3DS, the 2DS, and then the 3DS XL. Like Nintendo has a habit of doing little small iterations for people that are involved in that space. And it could be that they're looking to get second time buyers. If you dropped your Switch because it's a portable device, you're going to need to get a new one. So why not upgrade if you can afford it, right? There are options like that. I'm sure go into their calculations. But this little bump, massive bump in sales numbers and everything sort of kicked out the amount of time in their standard 5-6 year window to give them a little bit extra bandwidth to let the chip shortage work its way out, and also continue to make money during that time with its very hot selling console.
Yeah.
And it's not like game developers are abandoning the platform either. Game developers are still working very hard to make their games. They have to work very hard because the gap between the Xbox One PS4 generation and the Switch was smaller than the current generation, where it's Xbox Series and PlayStation 5 consoles to the Switch. And people still want to get their games to run on the older hardware, and that's a bigger gap to cover.
Yeah.
A much bigger gap. But there's so many people that have Switch alone that it's still worth the amount of effort for them to port. Right. So they are still doing it.
So to summarize, basically, what's being said here is that if you follow Nintendo's trends, 6 years out from their original console's release is when you would have expected Nintendo to have something. But that 6 year time frame put them exactly at 2021, 2022 time frame. And 2021, 2022 had two major things going for it. One was huge bump in Nintendo sales that had they released a new console would have cannibalized into that. So that's one reason for them not to have tried to release during then. The other, which is the current Tegra chip that they're using, is on a 16 nanometer or 20 nanometer. I don't know if they're still doing both, but at least the 16 nanometer
fabrication process,
manufacturing process.
Yeah.
The Tegra, the latest Tegra chip that they're likely to be using is more than likely on a 4 or 3 nanometer process. And especially during that time, the demand for using 4 nanometer manufacturing process was in such high demand that you had to pay extra to get manufacturing. This is what Sony was doing for the PlayStation 5, is they were paying for priority on these lithography machines that TSMC more or less monopolizes, just so they could get something manufactured and get more content manufactured. Nintendo, looking at this, would have been like, I'm not playing that game, I can wait. We haven't announced the system, we can push it out further. So I guess to summarize, there wasn't a good reason for them to release because it would have cannibalized sales, and it would have been a dumb idea for them to try to compete with Sony and everybody else for manufacturing time on these fabrication methods that it just would have been costly for them. And Nintendo also notoriously operates at a profit no matter what. I think since like the GameCube era, they have not released a console in which they lose money on a sale unless they're suspicious.
I thought it was N64.
I thought the N64 was not profitable.
Was it a loss leader? There, I was wrong about this at one point. I think you're probably right. I know that Yamauchi had a statement that was pretty amazing there, like, we will never lose money on a console again. Was right. Like, or some that's a pseudo quote that I recall from something like 20 years ago now.
Right.
So like, it stood out at the time as being like, well, Nintendo's not going to do the loss leader approach that their competition does, which sort of separated them. Okay, well, they're going to have to find some either price really high or find some other way to compete, which they did with the Wii.
They're sort of the way they've accomplished this before is like with the GameCube is like, okay, we're not going to go after weird exotic hardware anymore. We're just going to get off the shelf. Now, granted, modified, but what was being manufactured at that time. So they weren't going after some exotic chip. They were just getting what's off the shelf, and they would usually release at time periods in which they could benefit from the generation going before them. So like the GameCube was probably equivalent to a Dreamcast at the time when it was released, so it was behind what the PS2 was probably capable of.
PS2 had its own quirks. I think you could argue that, and it depends on what you
Yeah,
look at
I mean it does, right?
spec-wise.
Like it graphically, I think it was capable of doing things with textures, as was the Xbox that the PlayStation 2 wasn't. But the PlayStation 2 was using exotic hardware and could do things that both the
It had
Xbox
more,
and PlayStation or GameCube couldn't.
yeah, like the PS2 was better at particles because of bandwidth, or something, and then it
It
had
was like
such a
raw
small texture.
calculations. It was
Right,
capable of calculating a lot more.
right, but it had a much smaller texture cache, or
Yeah, exactly.
the bandwidth for the memory, the what amounts to graphics memory
Right.
was smaller, so they couldn't store as much in there. So there were trade-offs.
Yeah.
And Nintendo went with something that was more middle of the road, sort of like let's balance it. And then Microsoft came out and basically put a Windows box into
Yeah,
a fun
with
plastic shape.
I think in the
An 800 megahertz Intel 3 chip.
yeah, and the chip, it's in the graphics chip was also more powerful,
Yes.
at least for texture rendering than either of the consoles.
Yeah, I think it had hardware support for one of the like normal mapping or bump mapping that the other one didn't. The other two didn't at the
It was
time.
normal mapping if I recall correctly, but I could be wrong. Anyways,
Yeah.
point
Yeah.
is after that, the Wii and all those things were drastically underperforming compared to the PS3 and the Xbox at the time, and was released well around the same time that the PS3 was a year after the Xbox 360 was, but it was not competitive. But was making profit from day one. Like they would sell a console and they'd make like whatever, a $20 profit on it, whereas the PlayStation 3 was like losing $100 or more.
Yeah, even at its like $600 launch price or whatever.
And this is something that's continued to this day for Sony and Microsoft. Like they sell brand new, the console is going to lose money in the amounts of like hundreds of dollars that they expect to make back on software sales, whereas Nintendo goes, nope, we'll make profit from the day one. So yeah, like them trying to compete on fabrication and having to pay more to have the chips manufactured was just something that was not going to happen.
Right. Right.
What else do you want to add to this, if at all, in terms of what you think Nintendo was actually doing at this point in time?
Yeah, I think at some point what they looked at, and they very likely had a 6-year plan and said at the end of 2022, early 2023, we'll launch our new console. And backwards compatibility, maybe they mentioned that they don't. I recall some statement back when the Switch launched that they didn't want people to have to keep basically changing gears every generation and redoing everything. So it sounded like
they also said they don't want to make the same mistake they made with the Wii U, whereas they had success with the Wii and the Wii U.
That's right. That's what it was
in terms of sales.
And it couldn't take advantage of the built-in player base that was installed with the Wii.
Right.
Yeah, so that's I think what I was referring, what you just said.
Yep.
And so there are, they're probably looking at it and saying, okay, whatever they're doing next is very likely to be Switch compatible, based on that statement.
Yep.
There are many tacks that they could take to do that with the docking system, right? Like they could have it switched to be the dock itself is where all the new hardware is. And you still have the same handheld, but when you dock it, the game is a pass through into the actual processor is on the dock, and now you have a much more powerful system for the big TV. There are umpteen different ways that Nintendo could go about handling this, but they probably had some sort of plan, and then looked at it and said, "Well, now money is coming in like crazy." As of 2020, 2021. Now that 2022 numbers are in, they are at least some of the reported numbers over the year, the calendar year 2022. Nintendo's fiscal year, I think, ends in March. So we still haven't reached the end of it. But the calendar year 2022 did not sell nearly as many as either of the previous years. Huge fall off.
Close to about a third of what they did in 2020.
Right. Huge drop in sales. So it's definitely reaching either market saturation or just people are more interested in other things right now.
I mean, and there's good reason to believe market saturation hits around 120 million units sold, because that's been like the consistent cap
Yep.
that consoles have dealt with forever. Like there's
Right.
not really much that any that sell above that.
Yep. Yep. There are two examples. One's a handheld,
Yeah,
which
right,
is
exactly.
Nintendo, right? Yeah. So basically, Nintendo is now looking, okay, well, how can we inject more money into the company, and how do we like fund more development and future development? Very likely, and also appease people. Like people love to get newer shiny things.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean just like it is new, therefore I bought it. It is graphics are upgraded. The original Switch launched with 1080p compatibility for video output. It doesn't do 4K.
Yeah.
Basically, you can buy a 4K TV for $100 these days. It's silly, and that the Switch doesn't support that. That should theoretically be addressed. But now that we're at this stage, Nintendo, like the chip shortage is sort of over, or at least enough. Microsoft and Sony they've hit their stride with their consoles, so they have enough of a backlog that they're actually in stores now, at least not everywhere, but in many places, and they're obtainable.
Yeah.
And you're seeing a drop off in sales, as you would expect near the end of a generation. And this is sort of a natural ending rather than an artificial one where Nintendo said, we're just going to set the date for 6 years out.
Yeah.
Let's do it. So I think given all of that, we're likely to see one within between, I would say, later this year, fall holiday season. And then more likely, to my mind, just gut feeling would be spring next year.
Yeah,
make it a solid 7 years.
And if you follow like what Nintendo has done in the past, like spring releases for handhelds are very common for them. Like I think the 3DS, the DS, and the Switch were all announced and released by spring of whatever year they're released on. So it wouldn't be surprising that this is actually the case with whatever their update's going to look like.
Yeah.
I think another thing that leads credence to the fact that like they got bumped a year is their software release schedule which has been patchy at best for the past 2 years, and the fact that they specifically said that, hey, we're not going to E3 because we don't have content to show there, tells us like, hey, we have content going up to like May-ish, and then after that we don't know what Nintendo's doing for the holiday. So yeah, it would. I could see them, given that they maybe bumped off a year and they probably didn't change the hardware in any significant way, to like do like a stealth. Hey, by the way, we have stockpiles of hardware and it's being released in Christmas. Unlikely, but they could do that. It's within the realm of possibility if they had solid hardware for over a year.
I have another point to bring up that backs up the whole. It could have been this spring that they were originally targeting, and the software thing that you're talking about.
Yeah.
With the exception of the Wii U and possibly even the Wii U, now that I think about it, I'd have to check on this, but definitely the Wii, the GameCube to Wii transition and the Wii U to Switch transition were accompanied by cross-gen Zelda titles.
Yeah.
You had Twilight Princess that was GameCube and Wii.
Yeah.
And then you had Breath of the Wild, which had a Wii U version and the Switch version. It was a launch title in both cases, or near enough. So in the case of the Breath of the Wild, we're just getting Breath of the Wild 2. When? March of 2023.
Yeah.
Sounds like a pretty perfect 6 years exactly from the release date of the last one. Is that a coincidence?
Maybe.
Who's to say? Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, maybe. But yeah, I mean, I think in all likelihood, like they would have been ready for a launch this year had there not been complications, and they didn't want to cannibalize their own sales. And in addition, like they now probably have the procurement they need to be able to produce whichever timeline they want.
Yeah.
Whether that be this Christmas, which I think is unlikely because they haven't announced anything. Although Nintendo's known to be weird about these things, like the Switch was announced with with little fanfare, and they're like, "We're going to show you more later," and then they did, and then they had it launch, and they kind of went with a soft launch, kind of like the PSVR 2 right now, where it's like, "Hey, we're launching in the spring, but we really plan to sell a lot in the winter, but this gives us a headway to figure out exactly what the demand's going to look like for the Christmas season, where
Right.
they expect to sell a lot more.
And to learn a bit about the market and who their audience is that's initially picking them up, and what they respond to before
Yeah.
they put a ton of money into their marketing engine.
Yeah, so I mean, I think bottom line is, yeah, expect one as late as like March, April, May 2024.
Yeah.
But I think it's certainly possible that they could do a holiday release. I just don't think it's really advantageous for them to do that.
I think it would probably depend a little bit on what the shape of their next gen hardware looks like, which we have zero insight into.
Yeah.
And even the rumor mill has been light on details for that, but
Yeah, I mean, you can't really tell form factor from procurement lists. You can only tell like what kind of hardware is going into it.
Yeah.
And the thing that we know is the thing that we've known for a while, which is like it's a next gen Tegra chip that is going to be running on a much smaller process. And ideally, if it's inside the hardware, like inside the console itself, and it's portable, we should be able to get better battery life and more gameplay out of a chip that has a much smaller power demand.
Right. And to be fair, basically, even that information is pretty obvious, and you could if you were going to take a guess, that's what you would guess.
And it was set outright by NVIDIA and by Nintendo.
Yeah, you're like, well, what is a mobile capable chip that has good graphics processing? Well, there's only one. Yeah. There's only one like graphics heavy silicon on chip that is developed. You could argue that certain mobile devices like Apple's chips have good GPUs and paired with good CPUs. They're Apple specific though. They don't sell that outside of their company.
Like, and who is going to have a high volume selling mobile game hardware that uses a Tegra chip? It's like, well, only one really, Nintendo.
Or NVIDIA themselves with the Shield, but
the Shield is long. I don't think
they last updated about 3 years ago, I think.
Yeah, it's
but they don't push it. They don't. I mean, it's
also because you don't need the Shield to do what they want to do. Streaming anymore. It was useful at a time when you needed more demanding hardware for game streaming, but now a regular mobile processing chip will do it. Well, let's move on. We've talked 40 minutes on this topic, so let's keep it rolling.
On we go.
Yeah, I want to talk EU. Well, the latest on Activision and Microsoft. Do you want to cover this?
Sure. So basically, there's sort of two updates here that have occurred. The first is that it sounds likely or unlikely that the European Union is going to demand that Microsoft split up Activision to some extent in order for the deal to go through. Right. It sounds as though reports are saying that okay, let me back out. There are three major bodies that are currently investigating the planned acquisition.
That haven't had a call made one way or another.
Right. That are still actively investigating, and that the merger of the acquisition by Microsoft of Activision Blizzard King or Activision, and those three bodies are the American FTC, the UK's equivalent. I can't remember the name of it.
Yeah, I can't remember
of that group.
Yeah,
and then there's the CMA in the UK, which is the Competition and Markets Authority or something like that. At any rate, those three bodies are still investigating. We reported here mentioned here a couple weeks ago that the CMA had come out and basically with an early sort of request for feedback or call for responses, put out a draft release that said that they had serious reservations and Microsoft had to make some sort of changes or adjustments or respond in a way that could convince them that they were wrong about their assessment. But that some of the ways they might work around the issue is by breaking up Activision and selling part of it. For instance, Call of Duty, the IP and the teams developing it can be sold separately or maintain their independence from Microsoft, and that would go a long way to appeasing this acquisition or appeasing the CMA about the acquisition. The EU, in this case, the European Union, the report is saying that it sounds as though the European Union is not going to take such a hard stance against this, that they are okay with the offers for platform deals that Microsoft has been making with Nintendo and Nvidia, with the Nvidia Shield and their streaming platform, and presumably to Sony, who has denied them so far.
Yeah,
denied even just talking to them at all right now. But the other groups have been receiving, very nice deals, long-term deals for access to Call of Duty on their platforms, and apparently that is appeasing people in the EU and making them say like, okay, well maybe this is okay.
Yeah. At a minimum, it's met their arguments. So like they address their arguments and they have less of a argument to say, hey, we're not going to do this.
It is, it complicates Sony's stance on this, which is we're very afraid of our ability to compete in a future where Microsoft, Activision, Blizzard, King are one thing. Yeah. The other bit of news sort of in this realm is that Microsoft has sort of, this is not the right legal language, but effectively countersued Sony in a way. They filed for access to internal Sony documents to show that Sony, like to prove that Sony is already capable of competing in a future where that happens, where the acquisition happens. Sony is coming out and saying that we won't be able to compete. Microsoft has the Azure and Xbox Cloud cloud services and know-how and worldwide distribution capabilities that we don't have access to. That is a ridiculous amount of work and that's required to get there. They also have, they'll be buying the biggest game in the industry and a ton of other games at the same time, and then get to, determine whether or not it arrives on a system. And because the counter thing that they say when Microsoft says, well, but we'll give you access to we'll make Call of Duty playable on your devices. Sony's response to that is, yeah, it'll probably be buggy though, which will make PlayStation look bad relative to the other consoles, and then that is a mark against us. So like there's shenanigans that are being thrown around. There's he said, she said going on, and it's very difficult. There's a lot of things about incentives going on with businesses and how that'll affect the companies. In this case, Microsoft has basically requested access to 5 year, they said 10 years worth of documents in certain cases from different VPs and lawyers at Sony regarding their platforms, how much money they have paid for exclusivity deals, and various pieces like this, in order to put together their case to say, no, Sony has seen all of our internal documentation and is making these claims. Let's look at their documentation and bring that out into the public, and we can inspect it and see that they'll be able to compete. There's no way they wouldn't be able to with all this information. That is presumably what they're hoping to discover by getting access to these documents. The judges came back, and in most cases, they allowed Microsoft's requests for content. Sony had partial wins where they had to drop down. Microsoft didn't get the full access they requested. One was the 10 years worth of documents, and they said, no, 5 is enough. Yeah. And there was another thing about trying to see Jim Ryan's, performance reviews.
It wasn't just Jim Ryan. I thought it was more than that. They wanted to see
it was like the executive
reviews. Yeah.
Yeah. And then the judge said, no, some of this is due to like privacy. Like people are due their own privacy with respect to their reviews. Like we're going to leave that out of it. Yeah. But because it brings in a whole other question about personal privacy. Yeah. And so to sidestep that issue, they were like, no, you can ask for some of the documents you requested here, but not that. Yeah. So yeah, that's where we're at right now in terms of like these announcements. Like Justin, how do you think this affects where that merger stands at the moment?
I mean, I think it's still pretty hard to call it. Like, even if the EU goes forward, it may weaken the argument that the UK has and the US has for blocking the merger or blocking the acquisition. But UK posited fundamentally different arguments. UK's argument was, hey, it's not just that you'd own these IP, it's the fact that you are a company that has IP, technology, and a platform that makes it particularly troubling if and when your game streaming service takes off. You would be difficult to topple, and I don't know what kind of argument they could posit that would sort of back UK down from it. I think the things that would maybe back UK down is that the US also went ahead and approved it. But right now the UK is holding firm. They're not going to have a report for a couple more weeks or maybe another month. I think it's in May that their report's due.
Late April or May or something like that. Yeah.
Where they make a decision, and between then they can go back and forth, but they may require that Microsoft sell off or make certain assurances about their IP catalog in order to make it so that this move to buy Activision isn't as competitive. Now, with the case with the FTC, it's still unclear. Like the part of the whole legal proceedings that happened between Sony and Microsoft was because the FTC was like, nope, we're telling a judge to block the purchase, and part of the legal proceedings is Microsoft has to pose an argument as to why they should move forward with it, and part of the discovery process of them being able to make the argument was to acquire documents from Sony that would say, hey, Sony's more than capable enough to compete with us.
Yeah.
I still don't buy it. Like, if Activision wasn't so important to Microsoft's future streaming platform, they wouldn't have thrown $68 million or $1 billion out at the problem more than what they were valued at, and they wouldn't be fighting this so extensively to make it happen. Which I think is, evidence enough that it's super important to their long-term strategy to acquire an IP catalog like this. I think I was trying to put it together, and by revenue, Sony is the number one publisher with about $18 billion in revenue. I think gross revenue generation. And Microsoft stands at number 4 with, I think, like 10.1, or close to 11 billion in revenue. Activision's number 6. And Activision's pure software, whereas Microsoft and Sony can make money in other methods like services provided for their platform that Activision might not be able to provide. If they bought both of these, I think Activision's worth about $6 billion. They'd slot in at number 2 in terms of revenue generation, and that's without their Game Pass subscription service
system,
turning profit. Because I think right now Game Pass is marginally making profit, if not losing them money as of right now. So I mean, like it's a big deal. It's a big deal in terms of their ability to generate revenue, and it's probably very much strategic in their ability to corner the market on their streaming service. So they will likely do whatever they need to, minus losing their IP catalog or their ability to control their IP catalog that they'd be purchasing. So I think it will go forward. I think Microsoft just might have to make quite a bit more concessions to both the FTC and the UK.
Yeah, one of I have now blanked on exactly what I was going to say there about the complexities involved with Microsoft's play here. I have lost it. Maybe it'll come back to me.
Well, if you're curious about the other top 5, it's Sony, Tencent. Although Tencent isn't, I think Tencent's hard to measure because Tencent also dwells in non-game applications and investments in other game companies where they make money passively. Tencent, Nintendo, Microsoft. I think I want to say 5 is EA, 6 is Activision. What I'm surprised about is that Take-Two is not in those top 6. I thought the profit that they're making off of GTA, like pure profit, would put them up there, but I think they fall into like the 7th or 8th place.
Their portfolio may not be as broad.
Yeah. I mean, they make their money off of like 2 games, really.
Yeah, I mean the bigger ones are all making money also off of like mobile. uh, the like sort of mobile gotcha style games. Activision, even with Blizzard, with Activision Blizzard King with Diablo stuff, and you have
Candy Crush and the
King, any King, like all the King games.
Yeah.
EA has a whole bunch of mobile things, and I'm trying to blank on Nintendo. Even Nintendo has Mario Kart Tour and another one or two, which are full of like, in order to race some more, pay more coins to do to do this, and if you want to like open this chest and it might have a new racer for you with better stats, kind of a thing.
Oh yeah, fun slot machine mechanics.
All everywhere.
Yeah,
all these games have it. And they're why? Because they make a ton of money.
Yeah,
like done well and with good IP. Like, oh man, just money machines.
Yeah.
And when I say done well, I don't mean good for people. I mean implemented in a way where people don't notice what's happening.
Yeah. It's more of it's more rewarding and less obvious that it's a pulling a slot machine.
Yeah,
which is what EA has not done well repeatedly, and other developers have figured out. EA tends to like slapdash their slot machine mechanics, and people are like, hey, these aren't fun, and they kind of annoy us. Could you get these out of here? And then other companies have kind of done it in a more passive way or more rewarding way that kind of allows it to slide, especially with the mobile games.
Yeah. But
anyways, I actually compiled a whole list of all the IPs Microsoft would control.
Oh yeah, if this goes through,
went through, and in that list, I'll just go over it quickly. They would have Flight Sim, MechWarrior, Ages of Empire series, Halo, Gears of War, Minecraft, Spyro, Call of Duty, Crash Bandicoot, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, Candy Crush, Guitar Hero, DJ Hero, Hexen, King's Quest, Pitfall, Zork, Skylanders, Geometry Wars, Blur, Tenchu, Diablo, StarCraft, Warcraft, Overwatch, Heroes of the Storm, Hearthstone, The Lost Vikings, Banjo-Kazooie, Conquer, Sea of Thieves, Everwild, Perfect Dark, Killer Instinct, Viva Pinata, Cameo, Battletoads, Ori, Cuphead, Wolfenstein, Doom, Quake, Rage, Dishonored, Deathloop, Prey, Redfall, Elder Scrolls, Fallout, Starfield, Indiana Jones, not technically theirs because it's on loan from Disney, but Bethesda's going to be developing that. The Evil Within, Ghostwire Tokyo, Hi-Fi Rush, Psychonauts, Brutal Legend, Broken Age, Contrast, We Happy Few, Fable, Black and White, Forza, State of Decay, Hellblade, The Outer Worlds, Avowed, Grounded, and I'm sure there's a bunch more that I
could not list in that ridiculous list.
All of which have been purchased not all of which. There's some that had been developed under Microsoft, but the majority of those are games that were developed when they weren't Microsoft exclusive and became Microsoft exclusive as a result.
Yeah, and that actually reminded me of the complexity that I was going to mention here with that Microsoft has to face. They're really looking to build out, as we've mentioned, they're really building out their streaming platform, right?
Yeah,
Game Pass. That's the point.
It's why the Series S exists, because they're like, hey, this will help us sell more of these Game Pass
subscriptions. Right? Yeah. Like they don't need it can be really cheap and really cheaply built and have not all the greatest hardware in it because that's not rendering. Like that their Series X is in the cloud doing the rendering.
Yeah.
Like they don't have to, it's very light work that it has to do.
Yeah.
So, and then if you have a local game, it'll play it. It won't look as nice as the non-local version, but like whatever, good enough, right?
Yep.
So that was their whole push this generation. And one of the things they were finding is that a lot of people weren't playing ball with the streaming service. Part of the reason for that is because exclusivity deals and other deals with Sony, where Sony offers to pay some of the money for the development or give them a sweetheart deal or whatever, require that they do not make their game available for streaming platforms.
Yeah.
They're just not allowed to, as contractually.
Yeah.
So Microsoft is looking at this and saying like, well, I mean, that really breaks our ability to offer this service in the first place. Because Sony is the incumbent. Sony's of the two major like next gen consoles, the big players for classic gaming. Switch is its own space, but like the current gen consoles, Sony's market share is way, way, way bigger than Microsoft's. And they're able to command from the developers that basically say like, hey, if you want to play ball in our park, you can't, you can play ball in their similar park, but the other like new building that they've produced, you can't go there.
Yeah.
We won't. If you go there, you're off of our service.
Microsoft could have very well competed in the space as buying exclusivity agreements, as they did in the Xbox 360 era, which kind of kicked off this whole exclusivity agreement stuff with publishers as aggressively as it is today.
Yeah. Timed exclusivity was a big thing that started then.
Yeah, right. Tomb Raider was a time exclusive. There's a bunch of really big games that were once cross-gen and then got locked up on consoles for a year. So that started the whole process. And Microsoft could have competed in that space, but they went along the lines of, hey, if we want to have a streaming service that's going to be capable, it's not going to be good enough just for exclusivity deals. We need to start shoring up IP so other people can't have access to this IP.
Yeah, they also needed to make sure that it was day and date with the new release.
Yeah.
That is a huge thing. Like a lot of Sony has done streaming platforms in the past with their, well, they even have one right now technically, but it doesn't contain their first like day and date release with their big titles. No. Neither did their old Gaikai based PlayStation Now streaming service.
No, it was all back catalog stuff.
Yeah, it's all back out. So that was not, Microsoft looked at that and said like, well, yeah, they're streaming, but it's not generating any interest, because anyone who wants to play a modern game and socialize over those games, whether it be play multiplayer and socialize with friends, or be a part of the water cooler chat at work or school and discuss the latest, greatest game and how far you made it and whatever, and the cool stuff that's happening, you have to play the current generation games. And streaming isn't going to get you that if it's all back catalog.
I mean, Sony was not willing to explore new models when their model that they're using for the PS4 and PS5 was generating the money, so they never did anything that would cannibalize sales. Whereas Microsoft has been underdog for 2 generations now, have not been able to compete in hardware sales, and I mean, and even like, to put it frankly, high quality first party exclusives. Like, they bought studios to create them, and they failed to generate first party content that was really compelling.
They've had several E3s where they announced, we bought we're getting you great first party content because we bought a bunch of companies. Right. And none of that's really sort of paid off for them, it seems, at least in any sizable way.
Historically, they have pretty badly bungled their management of their internal studios. Maybe with the exception of the Forza Playground games and Turn 10, but in Gears, but they really have had a hard time creating new content that was interesting. So their newest strategy was, it's actually not their newest strategy. They tried the exact same strategy with when the Xbox One, the original Xbox came out. They were buying some pretty big exclusivity and working with Sega to get
Rare.
Exactly.
Well, Rare. Yeah, they did buy Rare. Yeah, they bought Rare and
they worked with Sega to get like Panzer Dragoon, Jet Set Radio as exclusive content on the Xbox. Stuff like that. Like that was their approach to it. Like, they couldn't develop and produce content that was compelling enough, and it kind of bit them hard. And so their strategy was buy the content and buy the studios, get a hold of the IP and get a hold of the studios.
Yeah.
I don't know if this is going to pay off, but it doesn't look like Bethesda's changed the way that they have done things at all. So the way, as apparently since Mojang was purchased, and they were given a lot of leash to do what they want from Phil Spencer, who's now running Xbox Studios. They're taking that as an example to ideally let their studios breathe without whatever was going poorly for them before.
Yep. But that sort of leads us as a great segue into our third and final topic.
Yeah. Xbox struggles to get a killer app. Which is true. It's so. I mean, this all talks about. This is going to be dwelling on Starfield. which has been the most likely to release killer app first party game, especially out of the new acquisitions that was going to put Xbox on the map. And for the first 3 years of the Xbox life, they really struggled to have content. Like they were able to get exclusive stuff from Obsidian, but these are games that were well underway before the next console generation kicked off, and nothing was really that that interesting. I mean, the two biggest things that people were waiting for, or the three biggest things, was Halo. Well, actually four. Let's go. Halo, the next Gears game that they know is well under development in Coalition. Then there was Halo, Gears, and Hellblade. Since was I don't remember what it's called, Sacrifice, I think. Those are the games that people were most looking forward to. That looked most next gen. And then Starfield, once Bethesda was purchased in 2021, people were expecting some out of that, and Starfield was announced that same year. It was announced that it was exclusive to Xbox, and has since been bumped multiple times. The first announced date was November 11th, when it was announced at E3 2021. That was the first press conference between Microsoft and Bethesda as a joint conference. Then the next E3, which was not a real E3, it was the 2022 not E3. They had another press conference, but that's when we actually got to see gameplay of Starfield. People are like, "Oh, we're gonna see what the game looks like," and they're like, "Hey, actually, it's not going to be in 2022. It's going to be bumped out to 2023 spring." Spring rolls around. We're at currently the last
just about.
I think it finalizes in May for Microsoft, or June. I can't remember which month it is.
Oh, are you talking about their fiscal year?
Yeah, what there was considered their spring runs into May, June.
All right.
Yeah. And so yeah, we got the developer showcase that we got a couple of weeks ago. People expected Starfield or some new information to come out of that. But instead what we got is Redfall making its way to the May time slot, which people expected Starfield to drop in. And so if that was the case, like, well, how are they going to let that cannibalize or have two games come in the same month on the Game Pass? That would probably not make it worth it for them. So this doesn't make any sense. Finally, yesterday, Bethesda, who's been doing developer blogs for a year now, showing the progress of Starfield, finally said, "Hey, we're going to be doing this big thing at E3. We're going to show off the game more." I mean, they've already done a gameplay showcase, but I think this is probably like a more like 10 minutes of playing through the game in a specific area with minimal cuts, which the last gameplay showcase didn't really show that. It was like a vignette of maybe 30 different shots that showed you, like, give you a taste of what it was going to be like. But with that announcement, they're also like, "Hey, June 12th it is." June 12th is the showcase. September 6th is the release date. And Todd Howard, although he's seemed confident in the last two times he's talked about this, he seems confident again. But this now puts us at 3 years where we have not got... Well, Halo was lackluster, unfortunately, for whatever reason that made the game not as enjoyable, not as appealing to its fans. We do not have Gears yet, nor announced date for it. We don't know when Hellblade's coming out, and we don't have an announced release date for that. Presumably this is going to come out at their E3 timed showcase. But now Starfield is not getting pushed into the end of the year. It will be a killer app if they actually land it for the holiday season. But what do you think this is doing to Microsoft's credibility with the Xbox fans?
Not being an Xbox fan myself, I have to sort of just, like a fanboy, I should say. I'm a fan of the services and of the games and the console. I'm not, but I don't ascribe to. Whereas as a kid, I was definitely a Nintendo fanboy. I have sort of divorced myself.
And an Xbox fanboy for a short period of time.
The 360?
No, on the Xbox.
OG?
Yeah, really.
Maybe for Halo, like the original
I think it's
Halo.
for Halo, and there's a couple other games that you really liked. And you're kind of down on the PS2 during that time.
I was down on the PS2.
Yeah,
Yes, I
yeah.
was.
You were so misguided.
I enjoyed the PS2, but I didn't.
No,
There
there's great
were.
games on both, but I mean, if you're talking
Yeah.
about volume of games, the PS2 was probably the place to play.
Oh, totally agreed. But
Yeah.
there were the games that I enjoyed. Definitely liked all the Nintendo first party stuff. It's obvious. Some of the Microsoft stuff was definitely more interesting. Like Halo changed first person shooters, and some of the cross platform games. If you had access to all three consoles, which I did at the time, you the Xbox version generally just played better if you could get over the weird fat
Unless
controller.
it was EA's what the hell
Yes.
is that engine called? It was a precursor to Frostbite. It was the game developed by DICE, or the engine that was developed by DICE, but it ran very poorly on the Xbox for some reason.
Yeah. Well, the one game I will say that absolutely blew my mind and that was the best version was PS2. Even though I bought the sequel on GameCube and was like, I want to play the PS2 version, was SSX.
Yeah,
that was fantastic, absolutely amazing on the PS2. Anyway, that stuff aside, can this hurt the credibility with Microsoft's sort of Xbox fans, Xbox owners? If I had just an Xbox, I would be sort of upset right now. Just because it's like I'd have been waiting for it and excited for it. There's sort of a dearth of top tier quality content on there, and by that I mean there's good quality stuff all over the Xbox and Game Pass. A lot of it is at this point library content or back catalog stuff, things that have been out for quite a while. You can still play on Game Pass, Halo Infinite, which has come a long way since it was originally launched.
Multiplayer at least, yeah.
Multiplayer. You can play Forza, which I did on Game Pass, the Forza Horizon, I think.
Yeah.
That was fantastic on streaming. I was shocked at how good it was.
Yeah.
And like you do all these really fantastic experiences, but in terms of new, fresh content at the scale that we're talking about with Starfield, right? Starfield is effectively a tier of competition that would go up against the Horizon games on that what Sony has is its first party games.
Right.
These huge set pieces that are very large, very expensive to produce, and contain a ton of content that can keep a single player entertained for a long time. And and Starfield I think has multiplayer capabilities.
I'm not sure about that.
It might be a single player only game.
I mean,
I'm not sure.
It could be. I don't recall them announcing anything about it specifically, but also we've not had a lot of details on what it's actually going to be.
Single player only campaign.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay.
Campaign.
Campaign. Yeah, there are no plans on adding a multiplayer mode.
Okay. Yeah. So it falls in lines with the Skyrims and the Fallouts, except for Fallout 78. 76?
76.
Yep.
Scott, yep,
Fallout
76. Yep. Right. So as a big set piece, first, one player game, like Microsoft really hasn't had much of that in a while. And
how much does it compel people to say like a PS5 owner like myself, which would buy an Xbox if there's a compelling enough reason, but now that the Game Pass exists, I'm like, well, I don't have to. And I had Game Pass for a bit, but then I was like, there's nothing that's really interesting to me on the platform. There's a couple like small games that I would pick it up for, but I'm not going to be paying month after month after month for the hopes of a game that I'm really interested in. But Starfield could very well move me to get a Game Pass subscription for a couple of months to play through that game.
Right. There is if you look at it, if the game was going to retail for $70, if Game Pass Ultimate is $15 a month, that is the equivalent of paying, like, you can get 4.5 months.
Yeah.
4 months worth of. If you can beat the game in 4 months, you'd do better by just buying it on, or getting a subscription to Game Pass for that period.
Yeah.
Microsoft's gambit is that you'll enjoy that service and play other games.
Find other reasons. Yeah. I mean, this is the same gambit that like Netflix has. Like, well, there's
Yeah,
enough content that slowly gets trickled out that will keep you saying, oh, okay, I'll keep subscribed for one more month.
keep paying you the
Yeah.
$18 or whatever it is a month now.
I mean, this is the challenge that Microsoft has had, is like they can't realize what Game Pass can do if they do not have content on Game Pass that really compels people to go, hey, instead
Yeah.
of buying an Xbox console, I don't have to, and I could just
Right.
play it streamed if I'm willing to deal with the latency issues that are pretty marginal at this point, assuming you have a decent internet connection.
Yep. And alternatively, one of the things that I will say about this, because this goes into our well, actually, before we get into that, what do you think about this in terms of credibility with fans? Do you have a different
I mean,
opinion?
there's probably a spectrum there, right? Like, I
Sure.
think if you're an Xbox fanboy, you bought a console after a generation where the console just really was not the best place to play a game.
Yeah.
They're talking about the Series, or not the Series S, the
One.
Xbox
One.
One. Granted, the One X was a great piece of kit, but
Yeah.
it was saddled with basically
You
a
ha-
third party option because the first party options just weren't that strong that generation.
Yeah.
So yeah, like if you bought an Xbox Series X, you went in knowing full well that this is where Microsoft stands today. You're probably rooting for the fact that they're locking exclusivity with a bunch of big titles and will be able to waive that, and you'll be able to waive that in the face of people who like other consoles. And you're used to dealing with the fact that you're not actually getting the best deal for your money, but you really like the brand, you really like Microsoft, you really like Phil Spencer and the direction that the Xbox Game Studios is going in, which I can get behind. I get that part of it. So if you're one of those people, you're probably okay with getting bumped off, and really like getting bumped a couple months for a great game to come out, I don't think is a problem in general. I think if you were a fair weather console owner and you're seeing like a handful of games that really compel you on Sony's that are not cross platform, you may be kind of bummed that you put your $500 in the wrong place.
Yeah.
And
that could be related to I can't get my hands on a PS5, I might as well get an Xbox Series X because those are available more easily more easy to come by.
But then you see things like Horizon, you see things like, well, maybe not Gran Turismo so much, but like Horizon,
Returnal, God of War.
Returnal, God of War especially. I think these are like the big titles that kind of ripple through and have a lot of buzz going around it. And now with The Last of Us, you're maybe thinking about, I could be playing part 1 right now if I had my PS5. So that's where there might be, like, there's just not the sort of content exclusivity on Xbox that a fair weather game player might be like, oh, I think I made the bad decision. I think those are the people that they have to try to keep on the platform. And you can see Microsoft taking a lot of strategies to keep interest. Like the Series S keeps getting discounted, and I don't think that is just from from the retailers. I think that is coming from Xbox saying, hey, we'll pay $50 and you can drop the price by $50. So now you're seeing like a $300 console dropping to $250, $200 even at times, or $250 with bundles, that sort of thing. I think I've recently saw like a $220 bundle that included a game. That's Series S. Xbox Series X I just saw go on sale for $50 off. Granted, it was a bundle, so the price was $500, but it was the Xbox Series X plus game. That would normally retail for $550. So yeah, like I think Microsoft's trying hard to sweeten the pot and to try to boost its numbers. And with Starfield probably going to be forced to come out this fiscal year, whether it be September, October, November. Let's assume that they're right and September is the release time frame they're going to get it in. I think Microsoft will be really trying very hard to use this as a way to get people either on Game Pass or as Xbox system owners that will buy subscriptions to Game Pass.
Yep.
So, yeah, depending on the fan, could go either way. It probably does hurt their credibility in the fair weather fans. Like, you may see some sort of movement from Xbox to PlayStation, given the content that's on each one, but I don't know. We'll see. Or me, which is like, once they announced Game Pass Ultimate, I was like, I do not see a compelling reason for me to own an Xbox when I could just
stream it from your
stream
computer,
it, yeah, on a
or
decent computer and instantly get a hold of these games.
or practically like a Chromecast connected to your TV.
Yeah, this is the thing when people are like,
Like
yeah.
it even
When people
connects
are
a
like,
Bluetooth controller.
cry PlayStation babies because we got all the content. It's like, yeah, but as a PlayStation owner, I have a computer.
Yeah.
If I
Or a
want to
mobile
play the
device.
games, I can stream it, and it's no loss to me. And actually, I pay less money to play the same game.
Yeah. It's $15 a month and like a controller
Yeah,
to,
and I
to
think
do
you can
it.
use a PlayStation controller at that. I don't
Pretty
think they
sure.
block
I'm
out.
pretty sure. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. So like, whatever controller you have. I know when I was playing it, I was using literally the old wired Xbox 360 controller.
yeah,
That I bought to do like game dev related stuff years and years ago, over a decade ago now. Still works great, works fine. Like connect it via USB and boom, it still runs like fine.
Yeah.
Like it was great, and I didn't have to spend anything for the hardware, and it like Microsoft tellingly for the you can buy the Series S by paying $25 a month.
Yeah.
For 24 months, 2 years, $25 a month. You get to keep the console, the controller, and during that time, when you pay $25 a month, you get Xbox Live and or Game Pass Ultimate for those 2 years. It's paid through that entire period.
Yeah.
As long as you keep paying the $25 a month. If you stop paying the $25 a month, you just have to pay off the rest of the console. But like that was a discounted rate off of just the hardware when it launched at launched at 300.
Right.
You would actually be saving $50 if you were going to use Game Pass that way. But like the hardware is at that point, if you're using Game Pass Ultimate, the hardware is just effectively a box to sit under the TV and convert your controller inputs into something that is sent over the network.
With the only exception being, A, I don't have a stable enough internet connection to be able to play online consistently, or B,
Right.
I play games that are competitive where
latency is huge.
is more important.
Right.
And for those people, yeah, like you probably need an Xbox Series X or Series S to play games the way you want
locally.
But for me, like Starfield's not competitive. I don't need to have like an extra 5 milliseconds of latency cut down. I'm willing to play at 30 frames per second anyways. So that's that sort of thing. Yeah. I don't know. Now, yeah, go ahead. I was gonna say, do you think Bethesda made the right call in delaying?
Yeah, that's I do, but I'm also like my history as a Nintendo fanboy tells me that was the right move. Yeah. And I say that sort of from a business standpoint. You and I grew up in a world of two different types of very highly marketed games. There were basically like Nintendo first-party games, which in the 90s and early aughts were notorious for constant delays. Yeah. Nintendo would just keep delaying their games until they felt satisfied with the quality and would ship a game. If Nintendo actually shipped a game, you're basically guaranteed that it was going to be excellent. Yeah. But sometimes what that meant is you would literally go a year and a half beyond the date that they originally set before, or 2 years before it actually arrived. Yeah. And that's really frustrating as a player. But at the end of the day, if they released a game that was half-baked, incomplete or buggy or just not fun yet, that does more damage to them as a brand and a company, because it also won't necessarily sell well. Even if it sells well once, they've done damage to the brand and to the IP. People are not going to trust it as much the next time. Yeah. So if that's the type of thing that Bethesda is dealing with right now, where it's not at their high quality bar yet, it's not something that they feel is on par with the Elder Scrolls games like Skyrim, like the Fallout games.
Bethesda has a pretty low bar for what they release.
Fair. Yeah. But for the bigger games, the ones that splash, that are like their tentpole games. Yeah. Fallout, the mainline Fallout games, not necessarily 76, which had a lot of problems when it launched. But that they may be looking at this and trying to say, like, let's not release the game in a state where we end up being the next Cyberpunk 2077, where it's full of bugs.
For that matter.
Or even Halo. Yeah, exactly. more apt, given that it's a target for Microsoft, and it is part of the thing that everyone's excited about for this acquisition, which hasn't gone through. So the exclusivity is still an interesting deal there. But it is a big thing for them to hold it back. And I, just as a person who likes to believe that giving developers enough time to polish the game will pay dividends, both in terms of me as a player getting to enjoy the thing I'm anticipating, and to the company to therefore make back the money they invested in development. I think it was the right call. What do you think, dude?
Yeah, I mean, like, it could go one of two ways, and I'm hoping it's more in the lines of what you said, is that Bethesda has had a history of making really excellent RPGs, but buggy and nearly unplayable within the first couple of months. Like Fallout 3 was horrendous in its release, like nearly unplayable. I lost data. I had the game crash on me multiple times. Lots of big problems there, and to the point where I stopped playing for like I think 2 months, and then went back to it after like a volley of
3 or 4,
3
or both. There's 3. Okay,
3. Yeah, 4. I don't remember the state of 4. I don't remember the state of Skyrim when it released, but the games are notoriously buggy. However, it's worth noting that during the release of especially like Fallout 4 to 76 and those games, or Bethesda was was being invested in by an external company that was looking at them to make money, and so they had pressure to release product as fast as possible to make their investors money. So you could look at it two ways. Like, them being purchased by Microsoft has given them enough grace to be like you said, do not release this game in a state that is going to shine poorly on us.
Mm-hmm.
And so, unlike the way you've typically done things, we're going to give you as much time as you need, within reason, to produce a game that is polished enough to be release ready when we say it is, and avoid the things like Cyberpunk has dealt with, what Halo has dealt with, where huge investments have gone into games, and the initial reception of the game was so poor that it negatively impacted the sales strongly. This is something that I don't think Microsoft can really afford to do again. Microsoft has to head it out of the park with this game. They have to have a killer app. If the game is reviewed lackluster, it's going to be like, why do I own an Xbox? Why did I pay $500 when I could be enjoying stuff on PlayStation right now? Why do I have Game Pass? Why would I want to subscribe to Game Pass when none of the games that are coming out that are exclusive to this really benefit me? Minus the cost thing, where it's like a bunch of games come out on Game Pass and you can spend $15 a month for it. So that aside, like, that could be your reasoning for that could be the reasoning for it. What I'm hoping is not the case is that it's following Bethesda's typical development process, and they are going to release a game that is not ready, and it's going to be buggy, and it's going to be a typical Bethesda game. I just think the way that they've delayed more than once, this is uncharacteristic of Bethesda, and in all likelihood, it's because Microsoft is pushing them to make a polished game that is not as buggy as it currently is.
Yeah, it could also be that there may be, I'm just throwing this out there, but there may be some impact that Microsoft doesn't necessarily want to rock the boat when the winds seem to potentially be slightly turning in their favor for the acquisition timing. Like, everything's happening this spring, which is right around the same time. Like, let's say that Starfield did launch in April, May, and the FTC and EU and CMA are looking at this, and the game sells gangbusters, and then suddenly all of the Sony can show that people are leaving, like their sales have dropped, and that Game Pass subscriptions are way up.
Yeah.
And they're like, well, look at the effect already, and that's not even including Call of Duty. Right? Like, that would be devastating to Microsoft's acquisition efforts. for that to go through. Kicking it down the road to September, theoretically, everything should be, the deadlines set by governments at this point are theoretically in the clear.
Yeah.
So they're not going to rock the boat that way. Like, that's another angle that this could be, that Microsoft executives are looking at this and saying, oh, the timing sucks.
Yeah.
you know,
and we could use some more time and iron out some bugs. Yeah.
Right. We can polish, maybe add some more feature, add some more content, and that never hurts. Right. So, like,
well, I think that covers the topics for today.
Yep.
I don't have anything more to add to that. If you enjoy this, like and subscribe. You can catch all of our episodes on YouTube. We have the back catalog under a live tab, so you can check out everything we've produced then, including our gameplay of us playing Hi-Fi Rush and A Way Out. So we're on every Thursday most of the time. I think we'll have it next week, but the week after GDC week, we will be off. So thanks everybody for following. Have a good evening, and we'll see you next week.
Yep.